All right, so you found an ancestor that fought in the Civil War. You looked up Wikipedia, you looked up Google and found some things, but you want to dive in more and get a bigger picture of what's going on with your ancestor. So this week in the research arsenal, diving into primary records of the Civil War, we're actually kind of summing up one of my favorite aspects of Civil War research, which is diving into primary records, whether it be records like this or records like this or records like this. It doesn't matter. Searching these primary records really is what is a fun discovery when you actually start getting into these records. But like if you're like me, a hobby historian, and you're just getting in and you really don't know where to look or don't even know what's available, you're kind of intimidated with all the sources, the documentations, and the papers that were filled out. And so it's easy to just read books and read other secondary and tertiary sources, but I challenge you, the discovery and the fun is actually into going to the primary records. So this video, what we're going to do is I'm just going to give you kind of a shotgun effect of all the different records that are out there that were filled out as primary records by the soldiers and the generals and the officers themselves that fought in the American Civil War. So stay with me and we're going to go through each one of the primary documents that you may come across, whether it be on Fold3, Ancestry.com, the Research Arsenal, or in your local state archives. So getting right into it, we're just going to go ahead and list some of my favorite primary documents that honestly, when you put them all together, it's amazing what you can discover about the day-to-day details about your ancestor. So here they are in no particular order. Well, maybe in my favorite order. We're going to go through these primary documents. Number 1, we have clothing ledgers. Number 2, mourning reports. Number 3, muster rolls, which are very useful. Then we have general and special orders, official military forms that were actually filled out in the field. Ordnance returns, of course, we have photos. And we're going to end with the official records, or the ORs, of the War of the Rebellion. For those of you who know what those are, yes, you can kind of argue back and forth that those are actually secondary sources, not primary sources. We'll get into that at the end of this video, but let's go ahead and start with the first thing I listed, which is clothing ledgers. Now, when it comes to clothing ledgers, I would say this. I'm starting with this because this is my favorite primary source material that actually, if you want to kind of dive in to understanding your ancestor or any individual in any regiment, it's looking at their clothing ledger. The ledgers themselves, they may look something like this. Actually, this is a smaller version. More commonly, though, they come in pages or ledgers about this size right here. And unfortunately, what you see on eBay or even in archives is individuals have actually taken out page by page by page to be able to, especially on eBay or other auctions, sell them by page. And the reason they do this is actually the same reason why I actually like this primary record, is because each individual page accounts for the clothing and the quartermaster's items issued to a specific soldier and then his name is listed at the top. And so when they are in ledgers, they're actually in a big bound book, and you can flip to whatever company you're looking at and then find, generally in alphabetical order, not always, and you can tell they try, but they kind of get out of order a little bit. But you get to alphabetical order, and then you go to the individual you're looking up. And what's just amazing about these clothing ledgers is they actually outline in specific detail how many socks and coats and caps and hats, just in socks or stockings, trousers, drawers, shirts, anything that the quartermaster issued, for the most part, there are some variations there, but anything that the quartermaster issued would be on this ledger specifically for the individual named at the top. And what's nice is you can actually see they have lines, or they cross out when the payment has been received and they're paid in full. They kind of like cross out the ledger and they start over like halfway down the page, and they just kind of keep going. Generally, one ledger accounts for maybe 1, 2, I've seen some ledgers that include about 3 years worth of time for certain regiments. But like I said, the details are amazing, where you actually can see that he was issued stockings or socks in 1861, and by the spring of 1862, he's already had 2 other pairs, or same thing with the coats or uniform jackets. It's actually a way that you can identify whether a regiment, especially for the living historians or the reenactors out there, you can help identify, did they primarily have sack coats, or were they wearing actually frock coats or uniform jackets in the regiment based on what they were issued. And of course, one of the somber things that you'll run across, especially at the research arsenal when you're thumbing through some of these regimental clothing ledgers, is at the, say midway through the war or midway through the page, let's say, there's a red line stricken and either a line or an X drawn on the bottom half of the page, and it says, died of wounds at Gettysburg, died of wounds at, Chancellorsville or KIA at Stones River or whatever it is. It definitely puts that somber, I guess, feeling, and you realize, what you're looking at, because these are pages that the quartermaster or the officers of that regiment, they actually held these pages in their hand. They were filling this out. When they had killed an action soldier, they were writing on this exact page. And that's what's just so amazing about primary documents. And so when it comes to clothing ledgers, I'll go ahead. There's so much I want to say about clothing ledgers because, honestly, again, they are my favorite source of primary records. But you can see exactly what they were issued, how often, and you can compare that to what was allowed in the Army at the time. They were only allowed so many greatcoats every other year. They were only allowed so many socks, so many sack coats, so many caps every year. There were a fair amount of soldiers that actually blew through a variety of those pieces of articles of clothing, and they had to pay for them out of their own pocket. Now, one of the things I will add before I move on is a lot, especially early war, and how these ledgers are laid out. There's not a column for item or article. Basically, all it is a date of issue, the money, and the rank of the individual, their signature, and then, of course, a witness, which is either a first sergeant or some other officer of that company. If you'll notice in these columns, there's not a title or a listing for article. Is it a hat? Is it a cap? Is it drawers? What is it? But what you'll notice a lot of times is that they'll forego the cost, or they'll forego the rank, and they'll put the article of clothing. That's very common. Or the worst case scenario, it'll just have cost like $1.52, $3, $2.59, whatever it is. You're going to have to do a little digging and research, which is honestly on the fun side of things. Do a little research on, at that time of the war, that date, how much were caps, uniform jackets, socks or stockings or drawers, and then you can compare the price to the article, and you can figure out that way what they were issued. So now moving on to my second favorite primary source material, which is morning reports. Again, if you're not familiar with morning reports, it's one of the most intriguing, I think, aspects of primary records, that especially on the regimental side of things. These are what morning reports are. They actually are reports that the regiment would take every morning, basically roll call every morning of how many people were present and fit for duty, how many people were sick, how many people were detached on other details or services. It just basically listed and I counted for every single person in the regiment. And so what this is interesting, why I love morning reports, because a lot of people don't see the value in them. For me, what I like about morning reports, because here's the deal, there's no names on them, they don't tell you who is there. Honestly, a lot of morning reports are just hash marks. You get others that actually have numbers written in them, but there's just a lot of just numbers, and it's a spreadsheet. Usually the day of the month that they're in. If it's a field morning report, it's just a long document that they just kind of list how many people are sick, present for duty, on detached service. If it's the regimental ledger, that they take all those kind of company, or they take all those field forms, they put them in a nice ledger, which is kind of nice because then it's all there. And you actually have the entire month on a single page, and you get to see, throughout the entire month, who is there, who is not, where they went. Not who, but how many people were there, how many people were gone, and as the numbers fluctuated throughout the month. So where you can use morning reports in regards to doing research of your favorite regiment, your ancestor's regiment, or, again, as a living historian or reenactor, you can figure out exactly how many people took the field that specific day. So if you're talking about like campaigns, whether it's the Gettysburg campaign, the Peninsular campaign, or whatever, kind of week-long or day-long, or even say weeks-long kind of campaigns that were happening, you can pick a day, and you can see exactly how many people were marching on the road, in that regiment or in that company. during that time frame, or obviously days, the specific days of battles. Now I will say this for a variety of reasons that I'm sure you can guess, having morning reports that you can actually get, and identify that were the day of a battle are a little bit harder to come across than just generically say the week before and the week after. Number one, a lot of collectors like those, so they're in private collections. Number two, or they're at state archives. Or number three, what I'm finding is that due to their activities of the day of the battle, early morning to late at night, they didn't do them. They didn't do morning reports that day. I know some of you historians are going to, call blasphemy that I said that, but there are, at least I've run across 2 accounts where guys in their regimental histories have actually said that no roll call was taken for that day of the battle. Again, that anecdotal evidence, I get that, but I can definitely see collectively how that would transpire, kind of transcend to multiple regiments as a whole, or even a corps or the army as a whole. So, and what I like about this is compare that to the ordnance returns. And we'll talk about the ordnance returns, but compare that to the ordnance returns, because let's say you have 50 people in the company present, accounted for, ready for duty, and then you look for the ordnance returns for that same day, right, that they did the ordnance inspection. Then let's say we had 50 people present for duty, but they only had 30 rifles in the company. And again, it paints a more detailed, more granular picture of that regiment or that company who fought in the American Civil War. And what I mean by that is that tells you, like, okay, we had 50 people, not, total, not like, 5 were sick and others were on detached service. No, we had 50 people, privates that were, present, accounted for, fit for duty, and only 30 muskets or 30 rifles in the company that same day, because you can pick, those days that overlap where they did the inspections and they did everything for that same day. That gives you an inkling that there were 20-some guys that didn't have weapons, and of course, obviously there's other detached services, there's other jobs that soldiers did in the regiment, but it still gives you a picture on exactly who was combat ready. Because if you just take a look at the morning reports and it says, 50 people were fit for duty on the day of the battle, so there must have been 50 people in that company. But then when you go to the ordnance returns for that specific, day, because they did it at the end of the quarter, and so if you're in that, say, month or that week of the end of the quarter, and they only have, say, half of those, then really how big was that regiment? How many people really took the field with weapons on the battlefield, right? And so that helps kind of give you your answer, that the morning report that says fit for duty may not match the ordnance returns on exactly how many people with weapons took the field in line of battle. All right, now moving on to the next primary record that's really fun to do some research on and get your hands on, or even like digitally kind of scroll through, is the muster rolls or the muster reports. There's a lot of different names for them, because I'll say this: muster in, muster out. The word muster rolls it includes a lot of different types of documents. Basically, in general, what a muster roll is a document that lists an entire company, generally a company, but lists an entire company, and by name, on the column, like they list them by name from start to finish, all the privates, all the NCOs, all the officers in the company at that point in time. Now, the types of muster rolls that were out there, they had muster in rolls, muster out rolls when the regiments were formed or then discharged. There were muster rolls for pay. There's muster rolls for quarterly inspections. There's a handful of different types of muster rolls, but they all, whether they're folded up in the traditional style or whether they're open, whether in big ledgers, whatever it is, muster rolls in general have a list of the soldiers in that company by name, specifically by name, and then any other detail of that type of muster roll. So if it's a payroll muster roll, then they would have pay on the columns, after the names. If it's muster in or other types of onboarding type paperwork for muster rolls, they would have their occupation, their height, their eye color, hair color, stuff like that, which is fun to trend and track that if you're a statistical nerd like I am. But that's the value of muster rolls. They actually list the people by name. So So if you're looking for your ancestor, or you're looking for a specific name that was in a specific regiment or a company, you're gonna have to find that regiment and that company, and then hopefully you can find muster rolls regarding the that individual. Now, something to note about muster rolls. They are hard to digitize. And the reason I say that, I mean, there's a lot of state archives, a lot of archives out there that have not digitized. I mean, they've digitized volumes of Civil War documents, but they tend, and this is collectively throughout the nation, generally archives tend to avoid scanning muster rolls. Number one, they're gigantic. And so, whether you're scanning at 300 DPI or 600 DPI or HD type scans, the size, the digital footprint of that size of a document is gigantic, because muster rolls, when they're unfolded, they're this by this. They take up, if I unfold it in front of my face right now, they would take up your entire screen. They're huge. Even the ones that are in ledgers, the bound book volumes, they're gigantic books. So number one, they're just, the size is enormous. Number two, size and even digital size, enormous. A lot of databases don't support file sizes that big. Number two, a lot of the muster rolls that were field type muster rolls filled out in the field are very fragile. A lot of them, back in the earlier part of the 1900s, that people were getting into preserving history, but kind of doing it the wrong way. A lot of the muster rolls that you'll find in archives are literally taped together. Even in our own collection, we have muster rolls that are literally duct taped, masking taped, scotch taped. We have ones that have archival tape, which is okay, cool, I'll buy that. But there's a lot of muster rolls that are just Home Depot, Ace Hardware style tape over the cracks, because they were either, instead of rolled, they were folded, cracked, and over age and time, they just get very, very, very brittle. I know the ones that we have in our collection, extremely brittle. Number one, most scanners they don't have that size of scanner, and so you have to either digitally photograph it and then fix it that way. But muster rolls, the whole point, guys. This is supposed to be a quick video. I understand it's not, because I get so excited about this stuff. But muster rolls, they're very valuable because they list the names, but they're very hard to come by digitally because they are gigantic and very fragile. All right, now moving into other types of primary documents, which is the general or special orders. Now, there's a couple different types of orders here. There's the orders that were actually pre-printed on a press and then handed out throughout the entire army or the corps, or whoever the intended audience was. You'll see these in archives. They're on the National Archives as well. They're digitally available. A lot of them are scanned. They're on state archives. You can find them on eBay for sale for 20 to 30 bucks per page or per order. But you'll find those as far as the general orders. Number two, every regiment kept a order book or order ledger in which any order that came to them, whether it's a general order or a special order, they would put down in their regimental letter or order book. And so this is actually kind of nice, because you get to see, throughout the entire army with the pre-printed orders, how many were distributed, printed up, and all the official orders that were sent out. And then you can see which regiment actually received them. And what I like is, because everything's dated, you get to see how far or how long it took on when they received it, because they'll note when they received it. A lot of these orders are legal matters, court martials, people being promoted, people being demoted, punishments being handed out, and every now and then you get to find some funny orders that there's a story behind. For instance, there's orders ordering cavalry and artillery troopers to not gallop or run their horses by infantrymen. There's orders telling soldiers, in some cases, to cook in a specific way for the next week for a variety of reasons. That's a fun one. I'll have you guys just research that one. That's a pretty fun one. But really, when you compare the printed ones compared to the regimental ledgers, you really get to see who received what and at what date, and what orders were actually more fitted toward them and what they thought about it. But as you scroll through them, like if you go to the researcharsenal.com, you look up ledgers for specific regiment. You can just kind of thumb through, and it's just a list in chronological order of all the orders that they received until the ledger is full, and then they go on to the next ledger. All right, continuing to move on in our primary records blitzkrieg of information, the next primary record that I love to look at are pre-printed military forms. So when it comes to pre-printed military forms, there's a variety of pre-printed military forms that they did on a daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. I mean, whether it is monthly returns of equipment, invoices, or stores, special requisitions, ordnance transfers, lost equipment, or equipment lost on the battlefield, or casualties on the battlefield, whatever it is, there is pretty much a form for that. So one thing you do need to know is that most of the forms, not all, but most of the forms have a specific order number or form number at the top when it's folded. So for instance, if I actually fold this form as it's intended for transportation, it's in a nice, basically like, envelope size when it's folded up, and at the top, it has the actual form number. In this case, this is form number 27, which is a list of clothing, camp, and garrison equipage. That was actually generally a transfer of equipment from one unit to another, or from the quartermaster's office or depot to an actual regiment. But what I love about these pre-printed forms, especially my favorite, the reason I'm using this as an example, Form 27, is because it's my favorite. It's a transfer of equipment. Basically, anytime a regiment or a company would receive equipment, and ironically, this is quartermaster and ordnance departments. They would actually just list them here on the number. What I find interesting about this is that they have two columns for the number. The first column, the narrow column, actually has the number written. The next big column is they have to spell out the number, kind of like on a check. You know why? Well, because we all know our handwriting sucks, and so what might look like a 7, when it's actually spelled out, is like, oh, that's a 3. Oh, okay, that's good to know, right? And then, of course, the next column is the article actually transferred over, whether it's pants, boots, blouses, shirts, drawers, socks, whatever it is, canteens, haversacks, knapsacks, whatever it is. It tells you what it is, how many were issued. And, of course, on the last columns, it says cost when new, condition when delivered, and any remarks. And, of course, that remarks column is pretty narrow. But in most of the time, and you'll notice this as you can start going through these, especially when you start researching your favorite regiment, a lot of these forms are not filled out completely. These guys did not care about doing everything to the letter of the law if they didn't have to. And so a lot of these forms are just filled out in a half-hearted way. They may have the number, they didn't spell out the number, and they put the article that, they read 3, hats. There we go. That's what we did, right? So you do have to kind of read between the lines a little bit because they weren't always as specific as you would like, especially as a hobby historian like myself, when it just says, caps or hats. Like, well, what kind of hat? Is it like the formal, uniform hat that we call a hardy today? Was it a forge cap or a fatigue cap? Like, what is it? And here's the problem too, is there's a lot of synonyms and jargon when it comes to the types of equipment, both modern day historical side of things versus what they called them, in the past. So for instance, whether, we call them brogans, or shoes, or booties, or Jefferson booties, all of those are talking about generic shoes that were issued to the troops. And of course, like for cavalry or artillery, we call them the jackets that they wore with the colored trim with yellow or red trim on it. We call those mounted service jackets or MSJs or shell jackets, but the actual quartermaster's manual specifies that they are called uniform jackets for the cavalry or artillery. So there's definitely some terminology that you're gonna have to have a steep learning curve on, but again, that's the fun of research. But to sum up the pre-printed filled out forms, you can find them in our archives. The problem with those is they're usually just loose in archival boxes, obviously in protective sleeves, but there's just no rhyme or reason to find those. If you go to the researcharsenal.com, you can actually click on the tile that says military forms. You can actually toggle back and forth on which form numbers you want to look at. We don't have a whole lot. I think on it right now, all we have is a few hundred examples of these forms. And obviously that's a drop in the bucket. That's not even a fraction of what was filled out in the during the war, but it gives you an idea of what kind of information can be on there. And of course, don't just discharge them. Don't ignore them if you ever run across any. All right, now to one of my other favorite primary records, which are ordnance returns. Again, you've heard me talk about ordnance returns before, whether they're the field ordnance returns that the actual companies would fill out, or whether it's the National Archives microfilm rolls in which they consolidated all that into big ledgers that you have in the entire regiment on one page or 2 pages that you can see exactly what they're issued. But what the value of ordnance returns are, especially when researching your favorite regiment, your ancestor's regiment that fought in the war, it'll tell you exactly how many weapons they had, not just how many, exactly what kind. And so whether it was the Springfield, the Enfield, the Austrian Lorenz, whatever it was, it tells you exactly how many. For instance, one of my favorite regiments, which is the 1st Minnesota, for a variety of reasons, not just Gettysburg, but very, very interesting regiment. The 1st Minnesota, throughout the war, during the war, especially early to mid-war, they had an entire company, I think it was Company L, one of the later companies, can't remember exactly, but an entire company that had Sharps rifles when the entire rest of the regiment had Springfields, right? So you have an entire company, I believe they had like 30 Sharps in that company, and nothing else in that company, just Sharps rifles. The rest of the regiment had the Springfields, and obviously from a tactical perspective, it makes sense. It's very similar to why you had cavalry regiments that had an entire company that was a saber company, or entire, say, cavalry corps or cavalry brigades that had a saber brigade or a saber regiment that they were, kind of focused on a specific type of warfare that you could employ them or deploy them where necessary. So again, things like that you may not have just generally run across. We get people who call us or ask us almost on a daily basis on, hey, so-and-so was my great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather. He was in this regiment. What weapons did he carry? Because I want to, buy one and hang it on the wall in honor of him, just, to say that's the gun my grandfather carried. And now you guys can do this. You can go on the researcharsenal.com, go to the ordnance returns, filter by the regiment that you're looking for, and then boom, right there you can see by quarter. So there's actually 4 quarters in a year. You may get 4 to 8. Sometimes 12 different ordnance returns from these regiments to see exactly what they had. And what's really nice is those regiments that span the entire war, you can see from early war to late war the different weapons that they had. And for some of these regiments, it is amazing how many different types of weapons. We had one regiment, I forgot which one it was, they had some 69 caliber rifles or smoothbore muskets. They had some, Springfields. They had some Sharps. They had a few other things. And pistols, the officers had like 3 different types of pistols in different calibers. I just did not envy at all the quartermaster or the ordnance, sergeants or the ordnance guys in that regiment. It's just unreal. So anyways, ordnance returns, very valuable. They tell you exactly what type of weapons and accoutrements that regiment or that company had. Now let's move on to the official records of the War of the Rebellion, which we call the ORs. Now, again, those of you who know what I'm talking about, you may kind of argue back and forth with me by saying, Steve, these ORs are not primary records because they were developed, almost decades, or I guess starting a decade or then up to the 1890s, decades after the war was over. But the reason I'm going to call them a primary record, especially for the purposes of this video, is because really all the ordnance or all the ORs are, the official records, is they took the actual letters and correspondence between the officers and the generals and all the commission officers going back and forth, the battlefield reports, exactly what was going on, their thoughts on everything. Or I should say official thoughts on everything. They took all those papers, most of them, what they deemed important or important to the picture of the overall picture of the battles. They took those and put those in the ORs, the official records. There again, they didn't put everything in there at all. There's newly found paperwork or reports from, for instance, Custer that are not in the ORs, that are kind of a new discovery, even though people actually, I'm sure, looked at them and then chose not to include them. But for our purposes, for the research we've done, I know Bob O'Neill, he came across it and was just kind of amazed that this wasn't in the ORs. And there's a lot of stuff not in the ORs, but the big stuff is. And if you're researching, your ancestor's regiment or your favorite regiment, if you're a living historian or hobby historian or a reenactor, whatever it is, if you're researching a specific unit, first of all, you got to know, we'll have a whole video on the ORs later, but you have to go to the index, kind of figure out where you need to be, what volume you need to be an edition. Then you go to the right volume. And then what I do, especially on these digitized copies of the ORs, I just Control F, keyword search what I'm looking for, and you can quickly go through these 1,000-page volumes and find what you're looking for. But again, generally they don't have a lot of specific names on soldiers or privates, obviously, unless they were, or NCOs, and maybe been flag bearers that died in battle or whatever. But generally, you don't get a lot of just names of the rank and file. Obviously, officers, you get a lot of names of officers. But what they do when you're researching your favorite regiment or your ancestors' regiment, the ORs give you a really good picture, more than even the history books do, of what that regiment did in battle. You may have a book reading about a book about a battle that your regiment went through, and what these authors had to do is had to, basically take volumes, hundreds of pages of reports, and condense it down to a paragraph. And so it's amazing. I know for me, it's my own discovery. Reading some of these battlefield reports of the ORs are just so interesting when you get it down into it, especially when it's a regiment that you feel connection with, that you can see your ancestor in Company K, forming up in line of battle, and when you have a battlefield report, say the officer of Company K led his men forward, you just have that connection of seeing your ancestor, man, just charging that bayonet and going forward. So again, it gives that deeper insight to that regiment that you may not get otherwise through just authors' books. All right, last but of course not least, definitely not least, is photographic evidence. When it comes to photographs, guys, you guys know a photograph speaks 1,000 words, 1,000,000 words. There's so much you can gain from a photograph. We have other videos on photographs and the value they bring. But when it comes to the picture, again, this video is specifically on just kind of a blitz of all the different primary records that you can see and get your hands on, touch, or scroll through digitally. And when it comes to developing a picture of your ancestor or your favorite regiment. So the thing what photographs allow you to do, obviously, is to confirm what that regiment or what that ancestor wore or had or were issued. For instance, you can see that in a letter that, he said, oh, we were issued our uniforms today. And then you look on quartermaster's, reports, and then you can see, or you look at the clothing issue ledger and look up his name, and you can see, oh yeah, he was issued a jacket on this day. And then you can see a photo with that jacket. That is really neat to be able to do. So again, photographic evidence is amazing. And also too, and this is something that a lot of you guys know, photographs, especially on the portrait side of things, a lot of photographers had props, right? Now, it's kind of a joke. It's a running joke in the collector's world or the research world for Civil War historians. That it's a joke of like, oh, that was a prop, or photographers gave those guys props. No, they didn't really have those in the field. That's a prop. I swear when I first started getting into researching photos, I would ask people questions, and it seemed like the excuse for everything is, oh, that's a prop, don't worry about it. It's not real, right? Real as in it wasn't that soldier's weapon, right? Now, again, this is what I love about putting everything together, and that's kind of what I'll end the video with, is the value of everything that I've covered in this video. When you tie the muster rolls with the letters that they wrote home to the clothing issues, to the ledgers, the orders from the regiment or that company, and tie all of that together and combine that with a photo of that regiment or of your ancestor, or forget your ancestor, of someone that was in that same company of your ancestor or your favorite regiment that you're researching, it just brings everything together in a way that honestly you couldn't otherwise. And again, that's honestly my mission statement of the Research Arsenal. That's why we created the Research Arsenal, is because, again, as a hobby historian, I don't have the time or the money to go to all these different state archives and just it will happen to me, just to find out that, oh, it's not here, we don't have it. I know it's in our catalog, it says we have it, but we have no idea where it is, right? Or come to find out, it wasn't in the state archives, it was in some random local museum in a town that has 500 people in town. It's in the library on loan for the past 50 years. So again, it's stuff like that. Our goal is to be able to go out there and digitize everything and then bring it, upload it to the database to where you don't have to go out, spend the time or the money to do that, and in the comfort of your own home, on your desk, wearing shorts, or in your underwear, it doesn't matter. You can gain access to all these records that we're digitizing and transcribing. And really, like I said, that's what you guys, your subscription allows us. It's not just, a subscription to gain access to, hundreds of thousands of documents that we have on the archive right now. What your subscription does is it actually lets us hire archivists and hire people to go to these local museums, go to these state archives, go to these, honestly, private collections. This is one thing that I'm so overwhelmed, the outpouring of support that we've gotten from the private community that have collections that have not seen the public light of day in decades, or sometimes have not seen a light of day in a century. That we're being allowed to digitize them anonymously, of course, because some of these things are amazing what they have. The context or the content of these ledgers are amazing, and what they're allowing us to do is digitize them, upload them as anonymous ledgers or anonymous donations, and put them up for you guys to see, because they understand the value of that. And guys, what your subscription does is it helps us pay for those people to go out there. So guys, again, if you're kind of on the fence, if you have a free subscription, which is all right, like those of you, if you don't know this already, you can get a free subscription to the Research Arsenal. See what we we limit access on the actual single image view. You're not able to zoom in on everything. All you can see is a thumbnail of the document, but you can see what we have, right? And then if we don't have anything that doesn't interest you, then don't worry about it. Don't subscribe. But again, those of you who really want to support our cause, more than just subscribing and getting what you want out of it, the mission statement that we have is to go out to these archives, to digitize it, to upload it, and to bring it to you guys. So again, I'll end it with that. Please comment below, what's your favorite, of what we've covered today, what is your favorite primary source? Whether is it the pre-printed military documents, the morning reports, is it the ordnance returns, is it just general letters? That we didn't really spend a whole lot of time on letters, but like, tell me below, comment below, what is your favorite document that you've either handled, run across, like to research. And of course, because you've stayed this long in the video, if you haven't already become a member, if you use the discount code RESEARCH, you will receive a 15% discount on your annual membership. So again, do that right now if you haven't already. Comment below what your favorite record is. And of course, until we see you next time, happy searching.